Welcome to the Think Infinitely podcast. I am your host, Taiwan Holmes Sr., and the title of our first podcast is The Adventures of Oskar and Harriet, the Hero and the Criminal. So in honor of Black History Month, I would like to provide basically my overview of race relations here in America, in particular the dynamic between European Americans who established and maintained dominance over this country and African Americans as well. Now, the one thing you'll get to know about me as we go through this podcast series is that I love stories and parables. And for myself, I kind of got the example from one of the best parable tellers ever, which is Jesus in the Bible. He just had the uncanny ability to make up stories on the spot that provided a mirror to his listeners, and then more accurately be able to see themselves and their situations and the lives that they're living in. And so for me, I love using stories to be able to help convey the message of what I'm trying to get across. Today, I would like to hold up the mirror to America and looking at the lives and adventures of Oskar and Harriet. More specifically, Oskar Schindler and Harriet Tubman. Now, if you're familiar with these two people, on the surface, they seem very similar. They both helped individuals who were in perilous, crazy situations. But if you take a deeper look, there's really a lot of distinctions that separate them two, in the fact that history can look at Oskar Schindler as a hero, while unfortunately Harriet Tubman remains a criminal. So in this podcast, we'll cover the dichotomy between their personal lives, and then more specifically and more importantly, a look back at how society at their times that they lived, how society viewed the individuals that these people were helping. So more specifically, how, the Germans and the rest of the world viewed the Jews, compared to how America and the world viewed the slaves that Harriet Tubman were helping in their situations. And I think that we'll find the response from Harriet Tubman's society in America here, I believe, is one of the most overlooked and consequently one of the most impactful realities that affects race relations between European Americans and African Americans to this very day. So let's get into it. Looking at Oskar Schindler, he was born on April 28th, 1908, in present-day the Czech Republic, to a well-off Catholic family. And he eventually chose to become a member of the Nazi Party. If you've seen the movie Schindler's List, Liam Neeson does a great job portraying him. And so when the Nazis moved into Poland, he chose to follow them in there. And what was very common for Nazi sympathizers, they will be able to, as Jewish properties were being confiscated, they were able to essentially take over those facilities. And Oskar himself, he had a flair for networking and being able to build relationships, and particularly the skill being able to getting to the leadership among the Gestapo within the Nazi regime, and sort of a quid pro quo, giving them what they wanted, which in most cases were, women or money or liquor, in order to get essentially what he wanted. And in particular, what he acquired was a factory there in Poland. And so, like other Nazis around him, he found the cheapest labor to be able to work in the factories were Jews. But after working with them in a close proximity, he began to really see them for the first time as, his employees, and being able to see what they were going through firsthand with regards to the Nazis and just the afflictions that they were going through. And so that caused a shift in Oskar. And his factory, even though they produced enamel goods and munitions for the German army, he found it as a resource to be able to eventually help the Jews. Because as it was very common that as they were being confiscated and taken to concentration camps, he realized that the more Jews that he could employ in his factory, it will prevent them from being taken away to concentration camps. Because again, from the German munition sides, it was helping the war effort. His factory was seen that way. And so he would go to great lengths to be able to ensure that he could keep as many Jews working there as possible. Even specific instances where some Jews were handicapped, he would still give them a title of an essential worker, and at times even bribe the Gestapo to ensure that, those Jews weren't taken away to concentration camps, and making his best effort. Now, throughout the war, Oskar had transferred the location for his factory several times. But with each move, he would update the list of his personnel who were working there and ensure that they would be relocated to the new location for that facility. Now, in total, throughout the war, he was personally responsible for saving more than 1,200 Jews from certain death in the concentration camps, which is pretty amazing for one person, especially doing something that he didn't have to do. He was safe being a German, but choosing to invest in the lives of other people, which is pretty amazing. So now I'd like to kind of transition and take a look at Harriet Tubman. Now, the exact date of her birth is actually unknown, but they believe it's sometime between 1820 to 1822, and she was actually born in Dorchester, Maryland. Now, her given name was actually Amaranta Ross, which I didn't know before I did the research. Now, her mother's name was Harriet Green, and her father's name was Benjamin Ross. Now, she was separated from her parents at the age of 5, which is a nice euphemism, separated from her parents. I want you to remember that word for a little bit later in the podcast. Now, when she became 12, she sort of began her life of crime. Now, she's known to the people in the South as almost a Moses in being able to help lead people out of slavery. And when Moses got his start in Egypt, in the Bible, if you're familiar with that, he saw a Hebrew slave being beat upon by an Egyptian servant. And so he went to intervene and ended up killing the Egyptian. And then that was his way to kind of begin his way of trying to help the Hebrew people. But for Amarita here, when she was 12, she actually attempted to stop her master from beating another slave who had ran away, which is pretty amazing at the age of 12. But during the altercation, she was hit in the head with a 2-pound weight, left her with a lifetime condition of severe headaches and narcolepsy. I remember in school learning about Harriet Tubman, and I remember that she had narcolepsy, but I didn't know how she came about that sickness. For those of you who don't know, narcolepsy is a condition where, without warning, you'll just fall asleep. So if you can imagine that you're driving a car or riding your bike down a road and your entire body shuts down and you fall asleep, how dangerous that would be. And that's something that she suffered with her entire life from the age of 12 on, which is pretty remarkable looking at, as we're getting into everything that she did with that particular condition. So moving on, in 1844, she continued her criminal streak due to the fact that it was illegal for slaves to marry, which if you notice earlier with her parents, her mom being Harriet Green and dad being Benjamin Ross, they didn't have the same name because it was actually illegal for slaves to get married. But she chose to break the law to get married to her husband, who was actually a free African-American. His name was John Tubman. And she actually made the choice to take on her mother's name of calling herself Harriet. Hence, we have Harriet Tubman. Now, in 1849, she continued to add to her rap sheet. In this case, it was grand theft. She helped 2 of her 8 siblings. She helped 2 of them escape to the north to freedom in the Underground Railroad. But her criminal streak didn't stop there. Once she was free, not free, but she was able to escape. She chose to come back to the South to continue to help, in this case, her reign of crime, to be able to help other slaves to be able to escape. And she was so successful a criminal, the slave owners in the South actually placed a $40,000 reward for her capture or her death, so dead or alive, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. Even today in dollars, $40,000 for one person is a nice chunk of change. But in the 1850s, sort of the equivalent today, the equivalent will be $1.25 million for one slave. She was that effective as a criminal. But even amongst all that, she was actually neither captured nor killed during any of her robbery scores. So in spite of the fact that, she was an African American operating her crimes throughout a European American controlled territory, and in spite of the fact that she was plagued with a physical ailment that would cause her to lose complete consciousness at any time without warning, and in spite of the fact that she didn't have the financial resources, she actually never lost a single piece of property that she stole, ever, which is a pretty amazing record in terms of never losing a single slave that once she took them from the property, she did not lose them ever, which is essentially perfect, which is very rare for anyone to be perfect at anything. But she was able to do that in terms of stealing slaves from their slave owners. Now, I actually have family that live in Alabama, and I've driven out there a lot. And every time I do, I'm really struck by just the landscape. To this day, there's still cotton farms there. And as you drive, and especially if you drive at night, it's just completely black. And just the courage that it would take to run away and head north. Now, when I'm driving there, I have GPS to help me know where I'm going and so forth, but they didn't have that. So they had to find a way to go from where they're at north on their own, essentially, just winging it. And just the courage and skill that it would take to be able to navigate territory that's not yours while being pursued. It's just remarkable. But Harriet was able to do that. And so looking at the lives between Harriet and Oskar, we see that Oskar Schindler was able to save Jews from concentration camps and ultimately a certain death if they were there. While at the same time, Harriet was able to steal African Americans from their slave plantations, and if they were to remain there, again, eventually certain death just through being worked to death. And so that's kind of what we have between those two individuals. So now I'd like to take a look at how, again, the society viewed concentration camps, dealing with Oskar Schindler, and then also how society viewed plantations and the people on there. So looking into Oskar, at the end of World War II, each of the four Allied nations, so we had the United States, Great Britain, Russia, and France, they actually provided a judge and a prosecution team which formed the International Military Tribunal in order to prosecute the German officials of the Nazi Party. Now, the prosecutors charged the defendants. The official charge was judicial murder and other atrocities which they committed by destroying law and justice in Germany, and then utilizing the empty forms of legal process for the persecution, enslavement, and extermination on a large scale. Now, I don't know if you caught that in the actual charge, but it says that after they emptied the legal process for the persecution and enslavement and extermination on a large scale. Now, I knew back in school that, the Jews were persecuted and they had their stuff taken away and that they were eventually exterminated. But it recognizes the fact that they also enslaved the Jews during that time as well. And that's something that, for myself, just never came up in history class, that they were actually enslaved. Doing more research on a topic I found on YouTube, if you want to check it out, it's called A Rich Man's Trick. And it goes into extreme detail in terms of the concentration camps and what went on and who benefited from this enslavement that took place during the concentration camps. It's very enlightening just to see, again, what happened, who benefited from it, so forth. It's just something that's, again, personally, I didn't know growing up. But there was some enslavement going on during the concentration camps. So looking at these charges that were brought against the Nazi regime, the judges actually delivered their verdict on October 1st, 1946. Now, in order to have a verdict, it took 3 of the 4 judges were needed for a conviction. Now, in total, 12 defendants were sentenced to death. And now among them were Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hans Frank, Alfred Rosenberg, and Julius Streicher. They were hanged and cremated in Dachau, and then their ashes were dropped in the Isar River. But Hermann Göring actually escaped the hangman's noose by committing suicide the night before. And the International Military Tribunal sentenced 3 defendants to life imprisonment, 4 to prison terms ranging from 10 to 20 years, and then acquitted 3 of the defendants. So at the end of the day, looking at the situation with Oskar, the world saw what the Nazis did to the Jews as a crime. Because it was a crime, people were prosecuted and eventually reparations were made, but a crime was committed against them. And so everything that Oskar did was helping victims who were being criminalized, who were being, crime was being committed against them. Now, looking back to America, previously, roughly about 84 years before this time, President Lincoln was replying to an article from the New York Tribune about how he personally felt about slavery. So the article was written by Horace Greeley. And so this is Lincoln's response to Horace about how he feels about slavery. His response is, as to the policy I, quote, seem to be pursuing, end quote, as you say, I have not meant to leave anyone in doubt. I would save the Union. I would save it in the shortest way under the Constitution. The sooner the national authority can be restored, the nearer the Union will be, quote, the Union as it was, end quote. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time save slavery, I do not agree with them. If there be those who would not save the Union unless they could at the same time destroy slavery, I do not agree with them. My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I will also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union. And what I forbear because I believe it would help save the Union. I shall do less whenever I shall believe what I am doing hurts the cause, and I shall do more whenever I shall believe doing more will help the cause. I shall try to correct errors when shown to be errors, and I shall adopt new views so fast as they appear to be true views. I have here stated my purpose according to my view of official duty, and I intend no modification of my often expressed personal wish that all men everywhere could be free. Yours, Abe Lincoln. A. Lincoln, excuse me. So after listening to this article, what stands out to you? For me, what I see as his priority is saving the Union in the United States of America, which is understandable. He is the president of the United States, after all. But one thing that I didn't know beforehand was the fact that he didn't necessarily care about freeing the slaves. Because everything I was taught in high school and middle school and so forth, and every February when I see his picture next to Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and so forth, was that his desire was to free the slaves. But here he makes it pretty clear that if he would have been able to save the United States without letting any of the slaves go free, he would have did it, which was pretty remarkable, because that's just something that, again, I wasn't told during school. And then even his last expression at the end, his personal wish, he says that all men everywhere could be free. Now, that's an interesting expression in terms of could be free, because I learned firsthand the monumental difference between could and would. And that happened when one of the jobs I had, I was doing inside sales, and it was an interesting sales environment. So we were cold calling realtors to be able to sell them websites. And so it was a 2-call close. So the first call, where you just call a realtor or a broker and you introduce yourself and you let them know that, we're working with the company and we have a program that could help them increase the sales through their online presence. And so you get them excited about the opportunity, and then we set up a call later that week to actually go through the actual marketing process and sort of walk them through what type of increase they would get, through their website and marketing performance. So before we confirm the appointment, there's a list of questions that we had to go through. And one of the important questions was, okay, so when we talk later this week, if everything makes sense that I discuss with you, and it financially fits your budget, could you see yourself moving forward and buying the program? And you have to get that yes before we can, kind of confirm that it's a solid appointment. And so I had an appointment with a broker, went through that explanation, and he said, yes, I can see myself moving forward. I said, thank you, and I'll call you on Tuesday. So logged the appointment, and then when Tuesday came around, we went through the actual presentation. Again, this was over the phone, but he's in front of his computer, I'm in front of my computer, and I'm walking him through different websites and showing him how everyone's going to be able to find him, from sellers to buyers, so forth. The total presentation took about an hour, going through everything, taking him through the different websites, and at the end, I made the actual sales pitch. So I went through the different pricing structures, from, price level A, price level B, price level C, and asked him which one that he'd like to move forward with. And he said, none of them. Now, we were trained to where if they said none, we kind of go back to our previous phone call, which I said, hey, when we spoke before, you said that if everything made sense, you could see yourself moving forward. And he said, you're right. I said I could see myself moving forward. I didn't say I would, which is a huge difference. And so I learned firsthand that just because someone could want something doesn't mean that they would. And so it's just interesting to see where his stance on, in terms of that he wished they could be free, not that they would be free. It's a different level of motivation between the two. And so, now I'd like to give you a parable and looking at, again, how society viewed slavery. Now, in this parable, I'm going to abolish hunger and starvation in the United States, which is going to be pretty remarkable. And after I do this, I'm sure we'll probably add my picture to Mount Rushmore, but it's going to be massive. So I'm going to ratify the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and this amendment authorizes every American, except for male Americans, the right to eat for free at any store or restaurant within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So if you want to go to Starbucks for breakfast, feel free to walk on in, get a grande, latte, mocha, whatever you want, totally free. Or if you got to get groceries for the week, you want to go to Target, get some groceries, load on up. Again, all food items completely free. Just walk on out, put them in your car, you'd be good to go. Or if you want to have, go out to dinner with some friends, go to Ruth Chris, get a nice steak and lobster, feel free. Again, even with the tip, it's all included per the 20th Amendment. Or if it's late night, you're out late and you're in the South, you want to stop by a Waffle House or a Denny's, again, out late, you want to get a nice little pick you up, just stop on in, completely free. Because the 20th Amendment, I've abolished hunger and starvation throughout the United States. Or did I really? Now, I'm sure if you're a man listening to this podcast, you would say, no, you didn't. Because you would still have to pay for your food under this amendment. Or if you're a man and you're poor, then you still can't get any food at all because you don't have money to pay for it. I'll read the amendment again. It says, the 20th Amendment authorizes every American except male Americans the right to eat for free at any store or restaurant in the United States. And if you look at the fact that the male ones are excluded, they can't benefit from it. So let's take a look at the 13th Amendment. Because as we know, it's a quote unquote, it abolished slavery. The 13th Amendment actually says that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. I'll read it one more time. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So, did you catch it this time in terms of the exception? So not only has slavery never been abolished, but it's actually alive and well to this day, especially if you're a convicted criminal. And if you just take a guess at who makes up the largest percentage of the criminal population within the U.S. So at the end of the day, the enslavement and extermination of the Jews in Germany were determined to be a crime, while the continued enslavement and eventual extermination of African Americans was amended in the 13th Amendment to be a natural part of life in America for convicted criminals. And thus slavery continues. So how that affects us today, or affects the world today, so looking both at Germany and America, so due to the fact that the root cause of the Nazi Party and what they did was considered to be criminal, all of the branches and eventual fruits from that tree of the Nazi Party are equally criminal today. So in Germany, there's a term called, it's a little difficult to say, but it's Volksherzen. And that law is the overarching law that makes it illegal to have any Nazi symbols or hate speech anywhere in Germany. And there's also even a crime in Germany to deny that the Holocaust existed. They've taken it that far. So essentially, Oskar Schindler saved individuals who were determined to be victims of a crime, and that is what makes him a hero. Now, if you juxtapose that with the response of America, where the root cause of slavery, oppression, and extermination has never been a crime. Therefore, all the branches and eventual fruit that extend from this root of slavery is completely legal. So as I mentioned earlier about Harriet, when she was 5 and she was separated from her parents, the reason why she was separated and not kidnapped from her parents is due to the fact that slavery has never been a crime. You know, other slaves who were raped and murdered were in fact not raped and murdered, because rape and murder are crimes that can be prosecuted by a court of law. But since slavery itself is legal, all of those branches that affect the lives of slaves and African Americans are equally completely legal as well. So branches such as the Ku Klux Klan or lynching and the eventual fruit of killing of unarmed men are all legal. So Harriet stole individuals who are still determined to be properties of their owners, which makes her a criminal. It would be similar today if you were to go into a prison and, break someone out of prison today. Now you will become a criminal as well as the person you broke out. So until American slavery is determined to be a crime against humanity, Harriet Tubman will remain a criminal, and all the branches and fruit of slavery will continue to negatively impact the lives of African Americans in America. Now, in my heart of hearts, I don't believe that the American government will ever determine that the root of slavery as a crime against humanity. But I am the CEO of IVW, which is Infinite Value Worldwide. And CEO itself actually stands for Chief Encouragement Officer. So I'd like to share with you some encouragement, some encouraging news. I've actually published my first book entitled Infinite Value for Students. And from the research uncovered in the book, I've created a training program that would actually unleash global peace upon every human towards every other human on a planet forever. The training program would also unleash global wealth upon every human who can spell their first name, equipping them to generate income at will, legally, of course. And finally, it will create an entire planet where there will be no unfulfilled needs. So if an individual has a need, they will either have the revenue to, one, get the need met, and two, if they don't have the revenue, they'll be able to go generate it legally and then get the need met, thus having no more needs. So if you'd like to be encouraged on how this will unfold throughout our planet, I encourage you to tune in to our next podcast. Again, this is Taiwan Holmes signing off with Think Infinitely Podcasts.